Hey guys, Will here. So today we're taking a look at the Simagic P1000 sim racing pedals. Now this is one of the most requested review videos I can remember for the past 18 months. And it kind of makes sense to me now. We've been testing these out for about 6 months now. And I can certainly see not only why they're so popular, but also why people have a lot of questions about these pedals. One of the really cool things about these is that they're a very modular design. There's a lot of different upgrade paths that you can take, some of which I think provide really excellent value for money and some not so much. So I'll be giving my recommendations with regards to all of that in today's video too. But one of the things that's particularly interesting is these little haptic motors that sit on the back of the pedals. They are an optional accessory, and that provides you with not only more immersion, but also more of a sense of what the car's doing underneath you. So a lot to unpack with these pedals. Let's dive in now and see whether these might be the right ones for your rig. All right guys, so we've got a lot to unpack in today's video. I'm gonna try and keep this as punchy as I possibly can for you. And for that reason, we are gonna be doing a separate video where we dive into the haptic motors specifically in a lot more detail than what we covered today. Now, we will be talking about these today in reference to how they perform with these particular pedals, but these are a popular aftermarket accessory, which you can also combine with a lot of other pedal sets on the market. So we will be doing a separate video talking in a lot more detail about these haptic motors, comparing them against some other options on the market as well. So stay tuned, make sure you subscribe for that. But before we get into the review, firstly, a couple of important things that you guys need to be aware of. Firstly, thank you to Simagic for sending across these pedals for us to check out today. Now, as you've come to expect from Boosted Media, we will be cross-comparing them against a few other options in the market in today's video as well. So it's important that you guys are aware that all the products that we'll be talking about have all been provided to us under exactly the same conditions. Now, if you do decide you want to pick up any of the gear that you see in today's video, or any other sim racing gear for that matter, we do have some discount codes and affiliate links available down in the description box. That's an awesome way of saving yourself a little bit of cash and helping us out in the process as well. So we really do appreciate your support there. But as is always the case here, everything that we're talking about today is purely just my own observations and my own opinions, having used this product now for about 6 months. So let's dive in, firstly talking about some pricing information. So all the pricing that we'll be going through here is taken directly from the Simagic website. Simagic do have quite a well-established distribution network across the world. So it is worthwhile just shopping around, making sure you're getting the best deal possible for your local area. You may be able to avoid things like extra shipping costs, shipping duties and whatnot by doing that. So definitely worth taking your time. But again, do just remember that 3% discount code that we have with Simagic directly if you want to go that way. So the base price for these pedals comes in at $519 US plus shipping and relevant taxes. However, as you see the pedals configured here on the table in front of us right now, the price would be $966 US. So let's break that down and talk through some of those upgrade options. So I've got the PHTS on here, which is their hydraulic throttle system. That comes in at an additional $139 US. There is also a hydraulic brake upgrade available too. We don't have that on here. We haven't actually tested that out, but that is $179 US if you want to go that road. Now the pedals do come with a selection of different springs for the clutch and elastomers for the brake pedal, but there is also a pedal performance kit available, which gives you a wider scope of adjustment for the brake pedal if you wish to have that. Now, look, it is something that I would recommend simply because it's not a massive additional cost when you consider the price that you're already paying for the pedals. And, you know, having more adjustment is always a good thing in my mind because pedals are a very subjective thing. I'll be honest with you guys and say that I was able to find a setting that I liked with the elastomers that came in the kit though. So take that as you want. But that upgrade kit is $16.90 for the load cell version. If you have the hydraulic upgrade, then there's a hydraulic version of that pedal performance kit, which is $19.90 US. Then you also have the haptic motors that we were talking about just a little bit earlier. Now, the core functionality is built into the pedal base. All you need to do if you do want to go down that road is just purchase the motors separately. You can buy them as 1 with a power supply, 2 with a single power supply, or 3 with a single power supply. My recommendation would be to start off with just the brakes, see how you go with that. I think that's really where these haptic motors provide the most value. The next one after that I would say would be the throttle, and then if you really want to, you can have the clutch as well, but I feel that one to be a little bit unnecessary. But the price for a single haptic motor with a power supply is $80 US. If you want to buy 2 at the same time, it's $135, or if you want to buy 3, it's $119. If you buy 1 and then decide you want to upgrade and buy an additional one later on, they're $59 US each. So that is the haptic motors quickly covered in terms of pricing. We then also have a couple of light bars installed on these particular pedals too. So there's the Simray heel stop, which is $39 US, and that is this guy across here. As you'll see later on in today's video, this has all sorts of different RGB effects and can also respond to telemetry and your pedal inputs if you wish to set it up that way. We also have the Simray bar, which sits underneath and puts a nice glow underneath your sim rig if you have a setup that's conducive to doing so. So obviously if you're playing in a well-lit room, you're not going to notice that at all. If you're playing in a darkened room, it may be something that is of benefit or of interest to you. So $39 US for the bottom one and $79 US for the top one. Honestly, for me, those are just a completely unnecessary expense, but if RGB is your thing, at least you have it as an option. But if you don't opt for the LED heel bar, you will get in the kit as standard a anodized red aluminium bar that looks like that, just in case you're wondering. So it still looks nice, but doesn't have the RGB functionality. Now we don't have it here, unfortunately, but it is worth mentioning also that there is a inversion kit available for $189 US. So if you like to run your pedals inverted, that is also an option. Just be aware that if you do buy the hydraulic upgrade for the brake, you will need to buy the inverted version of that, otherwise you're gonna have problems. So just be mindful of that if you are looking at getting a hydraulic upgrade and thinking about inverting the pedals later on. So yeah, look, I mean, if you were to option absolutely everything that you can for these pedals, it more than doubles the price of the pedals. But the good news is that the driving experience out of the box with the default setup is actually really good with these, as it should be, because they're not a cheap set of pedals to begin with. But look, having these options available in a modular system like this that allows you to just upgrade the things that you want and omit the things that you don't want, I think is a really smart way of doing it. And look, I'm happy to say that all of these upgrade options are well thought out and easy to integrate into the pedals as well. You're not having to completely rip things apart, take load cells out, and complex things like that. You don't have to really mess around with wiring. It's just a couple of screws here and there, a couple of clips, and you're pretty much good to go. So look, the overarching impression that I have of these pedals, and I said this in my initial impressions video many months ago now, and I'm sure one of the reasons why so many people are interested in these pedals is they just present as a really well thought out, really well executed set of pedals that are designed by somebody that really knows what they're doing, rather than somebody that's just looked at a real life race car and then gone, I can do that. And we do often see that with a lot of the bespoke, expensive pedal sets that we review here. Many times, they're very good, but they're just unnecessarily complex, and that adds additional cost, which just doesn't really need to be there in the first place. But yeah, look, as you guys can see for yourselves, this is a very high quality and very well executed set of pedals. So before we move on, I did promise you that I would let you know what my personal preference would be in terms of configuration, where I think you can save yourself a little bit of money on unnecessary upgrades. Before I tell you that, I would like to know from people that own this pedal set or are interested in buying this pedal set, what were you thinking of getting? Let us know down in the comments below. It'll be interesting to see what you think compared to what I think. But in terms of what I would do, I wouldn't bother with the hydraulic upgrade for the throttle. I'll explain the reasons why for that as we get on through today's video. I also wouldn't bother with the hydraulic upgrade for the brake. And the reason for that is quite simply that I think the load cell gives you everything that you need to drive quickly and consistently to begin with, and all of the adjustment that you need as well. I would option that upgrade kit though, just to give you a little bit more adjustability to account for the subjective preference that you might have in your particular brake pedal. I wouldn't bother with the throttle or the clutch haptic feedback. I just don't feel like they really add anything other than immersion to the driving experience. They're not really giving you any feedback that is actually useful to driving more quickly and consistently. I would option for the haptic motor on the brake though, because that does genuinely allow you to engage with the car at a deeper level and feel when that ABS is kicking in. It does allow you more consistency and more precision in your trail braking and threshold braking, at least in my experience. I wouldn't worry about the inversion kit or either of these light bars. So just to refresh your memory again, the pedals as you see them on the table in front of us right now come in at $966, and that's still not fully optioned. The way I would configure them, you're only looking at $615.90. So significantly cheaper, and in my opinion at least, will give you just as good a driving experience as what you're seeing in front of us now. So that gives you a good overall view of what some of the options are that are available. Let's take a deeper look now at what you're actually getting in terms of value for money, build quality, and all those important things. So I mentioned already that these present as a really high quality pedal set. It appears to be pretty much entirely aluminium construction other than just the steel fasteners. You can see that with the little magnet that I have here. The magnet is attracted to steel, but not to aluminium. And yeah, pretty much just fasteners around the place it sticks to. Everything else is aluminium. So a nice black anodized finish on the pedals themselves with this machined edge, as you can see. So that gives it a nice refined look to it. And then I'm not 100% certain whether these base plates are painted or anodized. They do have a slight texture to them, which looks like paint, but it is nice and uniform throughout, so much so that I'm not sure whether it's a texture on the aluminium and then it's anodized, or whether it is in fact painted. But either way, it does look really nice. The pedal faces themselves have got this kind of check plate pattern on them, which gives them a little bit of texture underfoot. They are okay to drive with or without boots on. I did do quite a bit of driving with just socks on. One thing I did find is that the cutouts for the screws are actually quite sharp on the edges, and I did find that they became a little bit uncomfortable driving with socks on. But other than the hard edges on the holes, you can see it does have a nice chamfered edge around the sides, and that made it quite easy and comfortable to heel and toe as well. So let's spin the pedals around now and take a look at what we have behind the scenes. Now these are quite heavy, about 7.5 kilos without all the optional accessories, so probably more like 8.5 kilos as we have them here. So let's start off here talking about some of the things that are universal across all three pedals. So you'll notice all three pedals do have a very similar cage, or the outer shell, and that allows them to keep the costs of manufacturing now because they don't have so many different parts to manufacture. Now in terms of pedal angle, a lot of other pedals that we've reviewed here on the channel either adjust from the base or actually move the pedal arm itself in and out. These pedals have quite an interesting design. You can see on the side here, you've got a couple of little screws. You can loosen those off, and that allows you to actually pivot around this area here. So you can tilt the pedal forward and back without it affecting the geometry of the pedal arms themselves, which is quite interesting. And you can see on the back there, again, a little attention to detail thing. There is that little gauge that you can use to make sure you match it exactly the same across all three pedals if you wish to do so. So that's our adjustment for the pedal angle. The pedal pads themselves, as you saw before, have 4 holes on the front, so you can move them up or down one position. Now, one limitation that you do need to be aware of in terms of adjustability is that there isn't any ability to offset the pedals front to rear. So if you like to have your throttle and your brake offset slightly to aid in heel and toe style driving, for example, you don't really have the ability to do that beyond just adding shims between the pedal upright and the pedal pad. So if we flip the pedals upside down, you can see the reason for that. So you can see there are a couple of additional holes, and that'll allow you to offset the pedals from side to side by about 15 mil in either direction. And of course, if you wanted to, you could remove the clutch pedal entirely and just run a brake and clutch, put the brake in the clutch position if you're running a Formula style car or something that doesn't require a clutch, so that your left leg and your right leg are running completely straight and not bending across. Now, while we're under here as well, we may as well take a quick look at the electronics. So you've got a DC jack here for the power for the haptic motors, if you option that, and then a standard USB-B connection on the back too. So you've got your USB interface box here, which is wrapped in a metal shroud. That should help with any issues with electromagnetic interference, although we've never had any problems here in our studio. So not really something that we can accurately gauge whether or not you might have an issue, but all looks nice and well designed here from what I can see. So this takes in the position sensor for the throttle and the clutch, and the position and load cell for the brake. Now you might have noticed I said position and load cell for the brake. We'll cover that for you in just a moment. And then you've got this additional cable here which runs down into a secondary electronics module, and this is our breakout for the power to each of the haptic motors as well as to our light bars. This little bar down here is that optional heel light bar that I was talking about before that has that sort of spill light underneath your sim rig. And that simply just sticks to the bottom with magnets, as you can see there, and plugs in. So extremely easy to install. Cable management underneath here is all relatively tidy as well. Obviously they need to leave a little bit of length in these cables to allow you to move the positions around should you wish to do so. And yeah, look, the heel plate just bolts in from the front, as you can see in this B-roll footage here. All very simple and all very sturdy as well, which is important because a lot of pedals do rely on fixing to a pedal tray that's integrated in your sim rig. So if you have a cheaper sim rig and you're using more high-end pedals, often that can create an issue. Whereas with this, there's a lot of rigidity inherent in the pedal tray itself, which will definitely help you with that. Just flip it up quickly again so you can see as well the 4 mounting points. So it screws to your rig via 1, 2, 3, 4 mounting points, and I'll flash some dimensions of that up on the screen for you now as well. So the mounting tabs can be a little bit fiddly, but you'll notice there are holes directly above them to allow you to get an Allen key through. So if you are mounting from the top down into aluminium profile into T-nuts, for example, it is definitely doable. With this, it can just be a little bit fidgety with washers and whatnot if you're trying to mount things like that. But let's flip the pedals back up now and get into a little bit more detail on this throttle pedal specifically. So as I mentioned before, this is the hydraulic upgrade for the throttle pedal. By default, it will come with just a standard cylinder like this, which is literally just a spring mechanism. And I'll pull that apart quickly for you now so you guys can see for yourselves. There's some lithium or similar grease inside there, and it's literally just a piston and plunger type system. And that pushes up against the back of the cylinder and provides the spring resistance in the throttle pedal. Now, look, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't really feel that the hydraulic upgrade was a necessary upgrade. So objectively, of course, it is an improvement, but you can see this guy does actually operate very smoothly and underfoot as well. Absolutely no issues there whatsoever. And you can see the clevises all have ball bearings in them as well. Very, very high quality machining throughout, good tolerances, no rattling or free play or anything like that inherent in the design here. Now, interestingly, this isn't mentioned in the manual anywhere, but you can actually increase the preload on the factory throttle if you wish to do so. So the way you would do that is by loosening the little retainer nut here. I've already pre-loosened that. You probably will need to use a spanner to do it at least the first time, and then wind in or wind out, as I'm doing here, the length of the shaft overall. Increasing the length of the shaft will increase the preload of the spring, when you put the assembly back into the throttle. And you can also make that same adjustment if you want to fine tune your brake. But let's take a quick look at that hydraulic upgrade as well. So you've got a little adjustment dial here on the back, which actually has a really nice feeling to it. I'm not going to get into button feel and whatnot like as if it was a wheel review, but I did actually really appreciate the quality of how that feels when you turn it into each position. But you've got adjustment points here from 1 through to 6, 1 being the weakest and 6 being the stiffest. And this essentially is just adding hydraulic resistance as you push in the pedal. So it's not overly stiff. Some of the hydraulic kits that we see available for some pedals are just obviously an off-the-shelf part, which has an adjustment range far greater than you would ever want for the context in which it's being used. Whereas this, again, this is just another thing that they've included, which is obviously designed specifically for the job at hand, which is a nice touch. It doesn't feel all that dissimilar to the factory. You can just feel an ever so slight resistance behind your foot, but still very fluid and very smooth. And even at the higher setting, you just feel the sensation of the pedal being physically connected to something. Now, I did notice that it does add a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of lift-off lag. So the pedal, under some circumstances, if you're lifting off the throttle very sharply, won't quite follow your foot. Your foot may actually disconnect from the pedal slightly. Nowhere near as bad as some of the other hydraulic pedals that we've tested over the years, particularly the Fanatec V3 pedals with their optional hydraulic damper kit, which I don't recommend. That thing just added a lot of lag to the pedal and made the input feel quite vague, but no such issue here. So look, if you do like to have that kind of hydraulic feeling to your throttle pedal, I think you're going to be happy with this kit. Just be aware that it will add that slight little bit of lift-off lag in the heavier settings, but certainly not a necessary upgrade in my personal opinion. Very easy to install. You just simply remove a screw on one side, loosen the screw on the other. Now in their manual, it actually showed just pulling that entire assembly out. In my case, I did have to just use a little plastic pry tool to pop that out, but very simple, it slides in. And the new cylinder is actually quick release, so you can pull it back and it actually pops straight out. And that allows us to see this carbon impregnated sleeve that they use. So yeah, just look, high quality componentry throughout. There's literally nothing here to complain about in terms of build quality, which I'm really happy to see. In terms of other adjustments, there are a couple of other things that we can do here. So we can adjust the pedal ratio by swapping between these two holes. And there is also a little sleeve in here as well that you can see that you can slide forward or back, and that does limit our pedal travel. So you can see as we push the pedal down, this top part make contact with the sleeve, and then vice versa on the opposing side as the pedal returns to its normal position, it makes contact. And that gives us a nice firm bump stop in both directions without any sort of free play or slop or any kind of movement whatsoever. Very, very precise. And you can see here, if I spin the pedals back around, no free play whatsoever in that direction or this direction. Very, very precise bit of machinery. So just quickly flipping it around again for you, you can see on this side, we actually have our position sensor. So they actually use a Hall effect sensor for the throttle, the clutch, and there is also one present on the brake, which you can use as well. And I'll explain the reasons why you might want to use that when we get onto the brake in just a second. But those have a resolution of 12-bit, which means that there's 4,096 different positions that are registered throughout that stroke. Now, it is worth mentioning that a lot of other pedal sets that we have reviewed here do have a resolution of 16-bit, which is effectively 4 times the resolution or 4 times the number of steps throughout the stroke. Honestly, I think if you can tell the difference between 4,000 and 16,000 steps of resolution on a stroke that small, you've got to be a robot or an alien. But if you are an alien or a robot, let us know in the comments down below. Always useful information for people to know. But let's move on to well, let's actually skip over the brake. We'll come back to that in a second and talk about the clutch next. And this has also got a very interesting design. So I know they're becoming more and more rare on the road these days, unfortunately, but a real life manual car has a bite point in the clutch. So a point where the mechanical plates inside the clutch actually engage with each other and connect the engine from the flywheel through to the gearbox or the driveline. So at that point, you usually feel some sort of a transition in the pedal. It's not just a linear stroke all the way through. And one of the things that they've done a really nice job of with this clutch is the way they simulate that. So it's a little bit difficult to demonstrate on the table here, but you can see as I push the pedal down, it's linear up to a point, and then there's a big jump and it suddenly dips down. And the way they do that is by this spring mechanism here, which can actually pivot in the backside and then dip down in the front. So it creates this kind of rollover effect. Now they do include inside the kit a couple of different springs. This was the one that was pre-installed by default, and it did feel quite light to me underfoot. It made that rollover point feel a lot less defined than what it feels with the red spring. So I prefer to run the red spring, the reason why that's installed now. But if you prefer that more linear feeling in your clutch pedal, then the red spring may not be for you. Very simple to change this spring out without the need for any tools. You simply just pull on the back to release it from the little clip, and then it all comes apart. The new spring slides in and you can pop it back into position. Now, if the 3 included springs don't quite cut it for you and you want to fine tune this even further, you can do so by winding in or out this little nut here. Same adjustments as we saw before in terms of pedal angle and pedal travel using the little bump stop here, and same smooth action, no free play, no slop, nothing like that to report whatsoever. Very impressed with the feeling of the clutch. So let's take a more detailed look at the brake pedal now. Now, the first thing I want to mention here is that I really like the fact that they've taken a different approach here. This is unlike any other brake pedal that I've ever seen on a set of sim racing pedals before, which I'm happy to see because it does get a little bit repetitive sometimes. So we've got a 100 kilogram load cell sitting down in the bottom here, and the front of that is fixed to the housing. The back of it is attached to this little piece here. So as you push down the pedal force is exerted into this part here. That then creates a deflection between the front half and the rear half of the load cell. That deflection is measured by a strain gauge inside the load cell, and that's what's determined as the amount of force being applied to the pedal inside the game. Now, I've mentioned a couple of times now that there is also a Hall effect sensor on this brake pedal as well that allows you to use position-based input to determine the braking force inside the game. Now, the reason why that's important is because inherent in the design of this particular elastomer stack that they're using here, there is actually a tendency for the elastomers to relax a little bit after the initial pedal push. Now, this is a characteristic of elastomers in general, but this particular design does do it a little bit more than what we've seen on other load cell pedals in the past. Now, at my skill level, admittedly, it doesn't really impact my driving, my consistency. I'm able to adapt my driving to account for it. And I think most people will probably find the same thing. But if you are in that 1% at the super pointy end of sim racing, you may find that that is something that has an impact on your driving. And you can see it in the data here on screen now. As I push the pedal down to around the 80% mark, it sits there and then it relaxes off by sometimes up to 10, even 15% as I hold my foot in the same position. Now, it is a bit of a crude measurement because obviously I can't make sure that my foot is exerting exactly the same amount of force throughout the scope of the test, but you get the point that I'm trying to make here. So if that bothers you, you can switch across to the position-based input. And look, I mean, there certainly is a strong argument for why would you spend all this money on a load cell brake pedal and then use a position-based sensor when you could just use a set of G27 pedals that would achieve the same thing. And look, what I would counter argue to that is that, look, what's most important in a brake pedal is how it actually performs underfoot. The fact that there is a clearly defined threshold point for threshold braking, and then the ability to modulate around that input. And a lot of cheaper position-based pedals won't have that ability to modulate like what we have here. So you might be pushing the pedal down to 100% all the time and then just modulating back off that. Whereas, you know, the pedal feeling underfoot mechanically doesn't change regardless of whether you're running the load cell or the position sensor here. So I actually found my lap times were exactly the same between the two of them, which might surprise some people. But again, if you have a set of these pedals, please do let us know in the comments down below what your experience has been like. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people out there that are a lot quicker than me that may feel differently about it. So that's a really great way that you can add some value for the people that might be watching this review and looking at buying a set of these pedals. But how does that elastomer stack actually work? So what we have here essentially is a piston. So this is a hollow cylinder. As we push the pedal down, you can see this part goes into the cylinder, and then the more force we put into the pedal via those elastomers, the more force comes out the other end into our load cell. So let's actually pop this module out now and take a more detailed look at it. So to do that, very simple. All we do is just pull in slightly and it pops out. You can actually see here, there's a little notch on the back of this to allow for easy installation again too. So all these little attention to detail things make it very, very simple. So what I might actually do here is completely remove this. Now you don't need to remove it to get to the elastomers to change it out if you wish to do so, but it is just a little R-clip on the side here with a washer and a clevis pin. You can remove those very easily. There's the R-clip there in case you didn't spot it. And that allows us to remove that clevis entirely. Let's just sit that down, and we might actually move the pedals out of the way for a moment while we take a look at this in more detail. So if we unscrew the cylinder here, and remembering again that there's no electronics inside here at all. The load cell is purely just interpreting the amount of force being applied to the pedal via this elastomer stack. So we can remove the piston, and you can see internally, all it is this part is pushing down on the elastomer stack via the washer here, and then the pin slides in and out of this sleeve here. So to change out your elastomers, and you can see I've got the softest setting here at the moment with just a selection of black elastomers. Inside the little kit that they include by default, remembering again, there is the upgraded kit available if you wish to run it. You also have a selection of different elastomers. Now, normally in a load cell brake, you would see larger elastomers that you might have a selection of 3 or 4 different ones. So maybe soft, medium, and hard. In the case of these ones, these are actually individual pieces. So what you can do is at a more granular level actually mix and match and choose exactly the feel that you want. So if you want to have a soft initial uptake, for example, what you could do is run a selection of black elastomers and then go straight to the red ones, which are the harder ones. And that's going to give you that sort of two-stage effect. So a softer initial push and then getting into the red zone afterwards. So you can pretty much achieve whatever you want out of this. And you can see even these can be separated too. So if you want to go 1 red, 2 blue, pretty much anything that you want here. So it does give you a little bit more range of adjustability there. Now, in the case of the performance kit, that actually also comes with some springs as well. So you can put springs in the stack, and the metal springs, of course, will have different characteristics to the elastomers once again. So you can kind of get a feel here for how you can really dial it in to feel exactly the way you like it personally. So what I'm gonna do while I have this apart is actually set it back to the default setting. It doesn't matter which way around you put this, the weaker springs will always compress first and the harder ones last. So let's put this back together again now. Simply just slide this into the sleeve, pin goes on like so, wind it back into position, and we'll grab our pedals back again. All very straightforward. Now remember again, before I showed you that little divot on the bottom, so we're gonna line that up. Now it is gonna be a lot stiffer than it was with the weaker springs earlier, but you basically just line that up, push it in a little bit and pop it down, and it pops into position like so. So very easy to change. Probably not something that you're going to be adjusting quickly before the start of a race, but if you do want to swap between cars, you don't need to use any tools to do so. And yeah, look, overall, I don't really have any complaints from a mechanical perspective. One thing just to be aware of is that if you are running the weaker spring stack, you may find that this cylinder can become a little bit non-captive. If that happens, what you'll want to do is just loosen off this retainer nut, and they do include a spanner inside the kit in case you're wondering, and just wind out that clevis pin ever so slightly from the sleeve, and that will just fill in that gap for you so that the pedal doesn't rattle around underfoot. We found that sometimes when we were lifting off the brake, we were getting a bit of a metal clack and we couldn't figure out exactly where it was coming from. It was actually a little bit of a free play between the ball and cup that we have at the back here. So very, very simple fix once we figured out what it was. So yeah, that's a quick rundown on the mechanics of the brake. We're not going to go into a whole bunch of detail on the haptic motors right now because we will be doing a separate video, as I mentioned earlier. But suffice to say at this point that they do just take a DC input. So you can see it's literally just a DC jack that we have here that plugs in. So I believe that these are operating similar to a voice coil on a speaker, for example, rather than a PWM driven motor or anything like that. But when we get into the full review of these, we will pull one of these apart and give you a good look at exactly how it works and get into more detail on how it's driven and everything. But speaking of driving, let's jump over onto the PC now. I'll take you through some of the software configuration and the adjustments between that load cell and position sensor on the brake too. And then we'll wrap things up with a little bit more on the driving experience. So let's take a quick tour now of the Simagic Sim Pro Manager software. Now, if you've seen some of our early Simagic videos, you'll know that software was a bit of an area of weakness, in my opinion, when it came to Simagic hardware. Happy to say that things really have come a long way in the time since then. And if you've seen our recent Simagic ecosystem overview videos, you would have seen a lot of examples of that. But we're just going to give you a quick rundown here as it relates to the pedals directly today. But just so you understand, this software is responsible for managing all of your Simagic hardware on your rig. So you won't have to have multiple software packages to run different bits of hardware if you're staying within the one ecosystem. That's something that we're seeing becoming a lot more common in the sim racing space in general. So I want to make it very clear here that you're not locked into the Simagic ecosystem if you do buy a set of these pedals. So if you want to run a different bass, different pedals, different shifter, different handbrake, whatever you want, you are free to mix and match, but keeping everything within the one ecosystem does keep things nice and simple, as you can see here. So if we click down on the devices tab here, you can see all the various different devices that we have connected to our rig currently from Simagic, and all of our adjustments are very conveniently placed just by clicking on each one of these tabs. So we're going to click on pedals for now, and this takes us to our basic settings pertaining to these pedals specifically. So we do have the ability to save, share, and import profiles if we wish to set up different profiles to different types of cars, different sims, and so forth. You can also filter by game here as well, which is really nice if you've got a large selection of different profiles here. We've got our standard adjustments for linearity here too. We see the same adjustment across most brands these days. It's been that way for a couple of years now. So if you do want to set up a non-linear response curve for any one of the three pedals, you can do that, and that can be useful for various different things. So because, as we saw on the table before, the clutch on these pedals does have that mechanical rollover or that mechanical bite point built into the pedal, you can actually adjust the linearity here to match that, to make sure that that rollover point mechanically matches the bite point inside your sim title. So the way you would do that would be to ramp up a little bit, get it to the bite point, which we can feel about there on the pedal, and then we want to have that adjusted So it sits at around the bite point percentage that we have inside the car that we're driving in the sim. And you can see now when I push down on the pedal, the red line, which is our actual output, will hesitate at around that bite point and then run away once we get past it. So it gives us a little bit more resolution or a little bit more scope within that range. So you can adjust that to whatever car you want. So that's just one example of the way you could use that in a practical sense for the clutch pedal. I don't generally like to use a non-linear curve for my brake, but that's just a personal preference thing. With the throttle pedal, say for example, you're driving a low powered car, you want to get on the throttle as quickly out of the corner as you possibly can. You might want to run a curve that looks something like this, just to allow you to get to that maximum throttle a little bit earlier. So that's just going to allow the throttle to ramp up more quickly at the start, as you can see via that red line there, relative to the white line, which is our actual mechanical input, and then taper off as we get to the top. Conversely, if you're driving a high-powered rear-wheel drive car, like a 911 Cup car, for example, in iRacing, you might want to set up a curve that looks a little bit more like this, just to allow you to stab the throttle on corner exit and not light up the rear tires immediately. So look, generally speaking, I like to adapt my mechanical inputs to the car that I'm driving, but different people have different approaches to this, and it's always a good thing to have the ability to make these kinds of adjustments. So that's just a couple of examples of some of the ways that that can be useful. I'm going to set those both back to linear for now though. Now you'll also notice on all three pedals we do have a top and bottom dead zone adjustment. So if you have a habit like I do of slightly resting your foot on the brake, you can see there as I would rest my foot on the brake, I've got an input there of 2%. If we increase the dead zone a little bit there to say 5 for example, that allows me to put a little bit of resting pressure, I guess you could say, on the brake pedal without it actually putting any brake force inside the game. Likewise with the top, generally don't use this for a load cell brake pedal, but if you are in the angle mode, which we'll talk about in just a minute, you may want to introduce a little bit of top dead zone. Likewise with the throttle as well, just to make absolutely sure that the pedal is always reaching that 100% mark. If there is a little bit of drift in the sensor, sometimes you might be only reaching 98 or 99% throttle input, which is of course going to be costing you time around a lap. So I usually like to just wind in 1 or 2% top dead zone. And that just makes absolutely sure that when I'm pushing the pedal down, I am in fact reaching 100% throttle. So that's just the way I like to set up. Likewise, if you have a habit of resting your foot on the throttle while you're braking, you can put a little bit of dead zone there as well to counteract that. Good idea to try to train yourself out of those kinds of habits rather than working around them. But in the years that I've been driving, I've never been able to get away from that habit of resting my foot on the brake. So that's just something that I do as a matter of course now. But those adjustments are available across all three pedals. And you'll notice on the brake pedal here, we do have a couple of additional settings too. Now let's just quickly talk about calibration first. So if we click on the calibrate button, very simple process of just pushing the throttle and the clutch all the way in and then pushing your brake pedal to the maximum amount of force you ever want to put into the pedal to reach 100% deflection. So that's going to be an arbitrary point. What I tend to recommend is push to the threshold point, and that should be about your 80% braking mark, and then push a little bit past that, and that would be your 100%. So when you're modulating the maximum amount of force that you would ever need to put into the pedal to reach 100% braking pressure. Simple as that, click finish, and that then gives you your pedal calibration. What we can do here with the force adjustment is wind that back a little bit. So say you're transitioning between, say, a Formula style car that has a really stiff brake into something more like a street car where you might not want to put the same kind of force into the pedal to reach maximum braking. What you can do is you can wind this down and save that as a separate profile, and that will allow you to achieve that. So you can see here at the moment, if I put in say 50% braking force, it's sitting at 50% there. If I wind that up, that number should go down. Yep, and we see that reflected there. So I'm having to put in more force into the pedal to reach that 100% threshold. So you can calibrate around that. It's not really a necessary setting, but it is a cool thing to have there in the context of being able to save different profiles. We then have this load cell and angle adjustment. Now this relates to what we were talking about before on the desk about the relaxation that we have inherent in the elastomers that they're using in these pedals. All elastomers will do this to an extent, but definitely more prevalent, I would say, with these pedals than any other pedals that we've tested in the past. So if you are finding that what we were talking about before with that relaxation and the drop off is impacting your driving, and just to show you again quickly in case you did skip over that part of the video, if I push my pedal down to around 80%, you can see the initial force is there, and then the number actually drops down. Now this is going to be a little bit crude because I'm not, of course, able to put in an exact stable amount of pressure with my foot, but push on the pedal, and you can see that with the soft elastomers, it ends up relaxing about 10%. So if we go to an angle sensor rather than the load cell, what that's doing is, as the name suggests, basing the input as the game sees it based off the actual position of the pedal rather than the load cell. And look, that doesn't have a massive impact on driving. I know everybody's gonna say, oh, well, they're load cell pedals, why wouldn't you wanna use the load cell? But look, the mechanical feeling underfoot obviously isn't changing with this. So I find with this particular setting, I do get a little bit more consistency in my braking, as I see on a graph like this. When I'm actually driving, I don't really perceive a massive difference between the two, but people that are a lot faster than me may well indeed feel the difference. So whether or not this ends up being something that is noticeable for you or not probably will ultimately come down to your skill level and how precise you are with your brake. But just to give you the reference here again, if I push the pedal down, now I'm holding the pedal in the one position and I'm not seeing any change in that percentage, as opposed to the load cell. Push it down and you will see that number drop off like so. So I think in the context of the hardware that we have here, it is a good thing to be able to choose between the two. So that is a basic rundown on the essential settings for operating the pedals themselves. We then have a couple of tabs across the top here for our haptic motors, if you choose to option those, as well as our lights, which are also an optional accessory. Now I'm going to be creating a separate review covering these haptic motors in a lot more detail than what we covered today, simply because these have become quite a popular item for people to purchase and actually use with other brand sim racing pedals as well. So you don't have to use them with the P1000s. And there's been quite a lot of people creating 3D printed brackets and adapters, which they're sharing for free within the community, which is fantastic to see, to adapt these across to other brand pedals as well. So we're going to be covering that in a lot more detail, but we'll just quickly take a top level look here now so you can see what these are all about. So important to know as well that you can in fact use these with SimHub too. So if you're buying these for a different brand, or even if you just want to run them on the P1000s, you can integrate these into SimHub, as you can see here, and that will give you more granular control over these motors. So you can see all kinds of effects here, from RBMs to custom effects, acceleration, G-force, road vibration, you name it, pretty much you can do it all within SimHub if you wish to do so. But within the SimPro Manager software here, we do have the basics covered. So quickly put my feet up on here so we can see what's going on. So we have a test button here to vibrate each one of the motors. Brake is vibrating there, and throttle, and that just gives you an easy way to feel what the effect will feel like once it's all set up. So what you can do here is you can independently adjust the strength for each one of these. You can adjust the frequency that they're going to vibrate as well. So anywhere between 50 hertz and 10 hertz, 10 hertz being obviously slower, 10 cycles per second. So if we vibrate at that level, it's more like a pulse. It's like bang, 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 bang. Whereas if we go up to 50 hertz, that's going to be a much more high frequency vibration. Pretty self-explanatory there. We can then bind that to whatever effect we want inside the game. At the moment, you can see we've got it bound to the clutch. So between the ratio of 25% and 75%, we're going to feel that effect that we've created up above. You can adjust that, of course, if you wish to do so. We can also bind it to ABS, traction control, or have it turned off. So that means that when the ABS kicks in, you're going to feel that through the clutch pedal specifically. But you can set this up how your heart's content. We're just going to leave it on clutch for now for the clutch pedal, and exactly the same independent adjustment for both the brake and the throttle as well. So you can set these up to be as strong or as weak as you want. So I think this follows the principle of less is more to an extent. All you're really wanting to do with these effects is just give your brain that tactile feedback that it needs to know that something has changed or something's going on inside the sim. You certainly don't want to have it so strong that it's bucking your foot off the pedal and impacting the inputs that you're making or the precision that you have in those inputs. So for example, if we wind it up to 100%, and hit that vibrate button, that is pretty darn strong. It's not enough to kick my foot off the pedal by any means, but certainly a pretty significant vibration there. And if we wind down the frequency, that's probably going to be even more profound. You can see that is actually now making the pedal bounce ever so slightly underfoot. Let's wind that back to 10 hertz. And yeah, I can actually feel that pulsing through my foot. But where I had it around that sort of 20 to 30 hertz range, somewhere around there, feels pretty accurate for a vibration of an ABS module kicking in, but obviously it's going to depend on the car that you're driving. So that gives you a basic understanding of what these vibration motors are all about. We then also have control over the optional lights here as well. So there's two optional accessories here, the SimRay bar and the SimRay heel stop. So these operate completely independently of each other. The Ray bar actually sits underneath. It's a little bit difficult to see here, but you should be able to see that color cycling going across the top of my shoes at the moment. If I go to a single color, you can see at the moment it's red. I go across through the rainbow there, and you can see the impact that's having. So if you're racing in a dark space, look, it's not something that's particularly noticeable when you're driving, but if you are driving in a dark room, you might be able to sort of notice it lighting up the room a little bit around you. Look, it's probably not something that I would spend the money on, but if you're into your RGB, you might really like this. Purely a subjective thing. So we'll go back to color cycle mode for now. SimRay heel stop works in exactly the same manner as well. So you can see across the top there, it's literally just this part here. At the moment, it is in rainbow mode. We can go to breathing, single color, or pedal follow as well. So this is actually quite cool. You can go following the throttle pedal like so, or the brake pedal like so in red. So again, look, not something that I notice when I'm driving, so it's a bit of a gimmick, but you know, you might really like it. That's purely up to you. So you can bind those to whatever function you want, increase or decrease the brightness. And there are a couple of additional options here as well. So you can have it cycle as a bar, like what we're seeing currently. You can have it cycle as a global, so the entire bar will change color. And you can also bind these to traction control and ABS if you want as well. So it will light up when those effects kick in inside the game. So yeah, look, I mean, I wouldn't spend the money extra, to be honest with you guys, on either of these things. But if you like that kind of thing, it's an option for you. That is the software. So I've already referenced the driving experience quite a bit throughout today's video as it relates to each individual component that we've been looking at. But look, as an overall experience driving with these pedals, look, I mean, the best thing I can say is that these are consistent with most other high-end pedals that I've tested over the years, with the exception of that slight relaxation in the elastomer stack that we did observe. As I said earlier, it didn't have a detrimental effect on my driving experience, but I'm not an absolute alien either. I'm sure there will be people out there that would be bothered by something like that, and I'm certainly not here to sort of try and discredit that in any way. It is good that they do have the option to switch over to that position sensor if it is something that does affect your driving. But look, my honest take on it is that as long as the pedal feeling mechanically underfoot is consistent, you tend to adapt to those kinds of things over time anyway. So as long as it remains consistent every time you're braking, then I don't see it as being too much of an issue. If every single time you push the brake pedal down, you got a different result, then obviously that would be a much bigger issue. If it was changing a characteristic as you were driving, as it heats up or cools down, for example, then that would be an issue too. But look, in my experience, I just didn't experience those things. So I personally didn't find it to be something that impacted my driving, but I would definitely recommend go out and watch some other people's reviews on these pedals as well to get their take. And again, make sure you check down in the comments section on this video to see what other owners of these pedals have experienced as well. They look a very refined experience overall, from the software side of things right through to making adjustments, swapping out elastomers. There really isn't anything to complain about whatsoever when it comes to any of that stuff. Very tight tolerances throughout as well. No issues with excessive noise, no free play, no slop, no weird dead zones, nothing like that, as you would expect at a pedal set of this kind of price point. But look, ultimately, my lap times with these pedals were pretty much the same as they were with any other high-end set of pedals these days. I have the privilege of having access to a massive selection of different types of pedals across a variety of different price points. And look, I can pretty much jump into a rig and within a couple of laps know whether I'm gonna get along with a pedal set or not. And in the case of these pedals, having come from my Simagic active pedals that I drive on my daily driver rig all the time, I adapted to these within a couple of laps and my lap times were pretty much exactly identical. Now there is, of course, at this kind of price point, an abundance of choice available to you guys. So I would definitely recommend check out some of the other pedal sets that are reviewed at various different price points over the years here. Some of the ones that I personally recommend at this point in time are the V&M pedals, the VRS pedals, Husingveld Sprints and Husingveld Ultimate Plus pedals. If you're looking in the more kind of high-end pedal sets, more entry level as well, I would definitely recommend checking out the Fanatec CSL Elite V2 pedals. Those are my pick for the best value for money pedals available on the market right now, simply because they do provide an absolutely excellent driving experience, all the things that I think are important to driving quickly and consistently, and they are quite significantly cheaper than what we have here. So I'm not trying to discourage you from buying something like this. There are certainly other benefits to owning a high-end set of pedals like what we have here, but it is also important to understand that you don't necessarily need to spend this kind of money to get a great driving experience either. So let's just quickly run through some of the highlights and things that I thought could be improved on this pedal set. So things that I liked: extremely high quality presentation. We don't need to go through that again. I think I've drummed that into you enough in today's video. Integrates seamlessly into the Simagic ecosystem. So this is something that's becoming pretty typical these days with most sim racing ecosystems. But if you are looking at buying a pedal set that doesn't have an ecosystem wrapped around it, you will just need to be aware that there will be separate software packages that you'll need to install to set up the pedals. So that can be something that's important to most people. Look, when it comes to pedals, generally they tend to be pretty set and forget these days anyway. Short of just switching between profiles and that initial calibration and setup, you generally don't need to go into the software anyway. So it's certainly not a deal breaker, but it is great to see nonetheless a nice integrated ecosystem. And again, that's becoming a lot more common these days across most of the major brands. Easy to work on with no tools required for any of the major adjustments. I think that's always a positive as well, and something that's indicative of a well thought out design. And just overall a very smooth and precise feeling underfoot with no free play, no slack, no weird dead zones, and yeah, just a very, very high precision piece of equipment overall. I also really like the modular approach they've taken to the design here as well. You don't necessarily need to spend money on various different elements that aren't important to you. So say, for example, if you don't care for RGB lighting, you don't care for hydraulics, you don't have to have them. And I think that's a really good thing, rather than forcing you to spend money on features that you don't necessarily want just to get some of the features that you do want. So all that's very good. And lastly, just to touch on the haptic motors as well. Now, again, we will be doing a separate review video where we dig into lots of detail on this. Personally, I could take or leave the throttle and the clutch ones, but on the brake, that ABS sensation does genuinely add not only more immersion to the driving experience, but does genuinely allow you to feel more connected to the car and get a greater sense of what the car is doing underneath you, which I think for a lot of people will ultimately lead to more consistent and precise driving. So definitely a consideration there. But again, do be mindful of the fact that you can install these haptic motors on other pedals. So you don't necessarily need to fork out for a more high-end set of pedals like this to enjoy that. And as part of that review, we will also be taking a look at some third-party alternatives to these as well. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on that. So that's all the major things that stood out to me. Here's some of the things that I thought could be improved. Now, we've already talked about it in detail, and while it wasn't an issue for me personally, I would like to see some sort of way to eliminate that relaxation, or at least minimize that relaxation that we see in those elastomers under braking as well. Because I think that regardless of what I say subjectively in terms of how it influences my driving experience, some people inevitably are going to see that in the review video, and it's going to be a deal breaker for them. So I think that is something that could potentially be addressed, and hopefully will be into the future. That's probably the only major sticking point that I think most people would have with these pedals. And other than that, really, it's just tiny little nitpicks. Like, I wasn't a big fan of these sharper edges on these screw holes. I did find that it made the pedal pads a little bit uncomfortable to use with socks, but you can swap them out to something else if you want to. And yeah, look, otherwise, very, very happy with these set of pedals, as I should be for the price point. They're certainly not cheap. And just to close up here again, I will just quickly run you through my preferred configuration in case you skipped it over earlier on in the video. So I wouldn't bother with the RGB lighting, purely subjective. I wouldn't bother with the clutch or the throttle haptic motors. I just don't think that they necessarily add a whole lot to the driving experience just beyond immersion. ABS module I would go for. I wouldn't bother with the hydraulic upgrade for the brake or the throttle, because I feel like the factory ones do a perfectly okay job. Simple as that, guys. So really hope that today's video has helped you out. If it has, please leave a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on that haptic motor video that will be coming as soon as we possibly can. And definitely make sure you check out some of those other reviews that I referenced and have linked down in the description below as well. If you do want to pick up any sim racing gear, whether it's these pedals or anything else that we've talked about or any other gear, make sure you check out those discount codes linked down in the description below as well. boostedmedia.net for more information on that if you want it. But above all, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again soon. Bye.